If somebody says, do you believe in evolution? I say, well, what do you mean? Well, you know, evolution. No, which one are you talking about? There are 6 meanings to the word. Are you talking about cosmic evolution, the origin of time, space, matter? I don't believe in that, with the Big Bang. We'll talk about that in a minute. Are we talking about chemical evolution? Because according to the Big Bang theory, the Big Bang, you know, produced hydrogen and maybe some helium. Well, then how did we get all these other elements? Do you want me to believe uranium evolved from hydrogen? They'll say, well, yeah, fusion. You have fusion in stars. Yeah, but you can't fuse past iron very well. Number 2, you got a chicken and an egg problem here because you have to have the stars to make the elements and the elements to make the stars. Which one came first? Which brings up, of course, stellar evolution. How did the stars form? You know, nobody's ever seen a star form. Scientists don't even have a clue how a star could form. No even good theories about star formation. We cover more on that on video 7. But we see stars blow up all the time. It's called a nova or a supernova if it's a big one. That happens all the time. But we never see one form. And yet there's enough stars out there that we know about that everybody on planet Earth, every single individual, can personally own 11 trillion stars to yourself. Those are the ones we know about. We don't know about the ones that we don't know about. Fourthly, there's going to have to be organic evolution. Life has to get started from non-living material. Nobody has a clue how that could happen. Then we're going to have what's called macroevolution. That's where an animal changes to a different kind of animal. Did you know nobody has ever seen a dog produce a non-dog? Never. You may get a big dog or a little dog, but you're going to get a dog every time. And it could be that the dog, the wolf, and the coyote had a common ancestor. I wouldn't argue about that. They probably did. But every 5-year-old kid knows they're the same kind of animal. Lastly, we have what is called microevolution. This is changes within the kinds. Now, that one happens. I'll go along with number 6. I think animals can produce a whole variety of offspring. You know, long hair, long-legged, short-legged. That happens. But the first 5 are purely religious. That's not science. We never observe any of those. So if you want to win the debate on evolution, simply define exactly what you're talking about. And you'll find all they ever give are examples of number 6, which there's no argument about it. It happens. But then they imply that that is somehow magically evidence for the other 5, and it is not. If the merry-go-round is going clockwise, when the kid flies off, the kid will be spinning clockwise until he encounters resistance, like a tree or a pole. That's because of a law in physics known as the conservation of angular momentum. See, if a spinning object breaks apart, the pieces that fly off are going to spin the same direction because the outside's moving faster than the inside. And we could talk all day about the conservation laws if you'd like, but the professor said, yes, I know about the conservation laws. I said, well, good, sir, then let me ask you a question. If the universe began as a spinning dot, like you said, why do 2 planets spin backwards, and probably 3? He got real quiet, puzzled look on his face. I said, sir, why do 8 out of 91 known moons spin backwards? Why do Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune have moons going both directions at the same time? Why is the sun 98% hydrogen and helium, but the other planets are less than 1% hydrogen and helium? And why are these 9 planets so different from each other? If it all came from a Big Bang, I mean, why are they all so different? Very different compositions. And why do some whole galaxies spin backwards? CNN did an article, Goofy Galaxy spins in wrong direction. And the Big Bang Theory is ludicrous for numerous reasons, okay? If the Big Bang Theory were true, the matter would be evenly distributed. But it's not. Serious, serious problems with the Big Bang Theory. Even Fred Hoyle said, I have little hesitation in saying the sickly pall hangs over the Big Bang Theory. The second law of thermodynamics tells us everything tends toward disorder. If you leave something alone for a while, it's going to rot, rust, die, fall apart, or break down. Nothing gets better by itself. Everything tends toward chaos, folks, all right? All you have to do is nothing, and everything deteriorates, collapses, breaks down, wears out. That's what the second law is all about. Everything is getting worse. Nothing's getting better. But the textbook says humans probably evolved from bacteria more than 4 billion years ago. Was your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa bacteria? Evolutionists will say, well, Hovind, don't you know if you add energy, you can overcome the second law of thermodynamics? And the earth receives energy from the sun, so the earth is an open system, and that's how we overcome the law. I understand the argument, but they're missing the point. The universe is a closed system, number one. Number two, adding energy is destructive unless there's a special mechanism to use and harness the energy. See, the Japanese added a bunch of energy to Pearl Harbor one day. They didn't organize a thing for us, did they? So a few years later, we added some energy to a few of their cities, didn't we? Returned the favor. Didn't organize anything for them. Adding energy is destructive. The sun adds energy to the roof of your house, but it's going to destroy your house. The sun's energy will destroy the entire house. The sun's energy will destroy the roof on your car. It will destroy your upholstery. The sun's energy will destroy your paint job. There's only one thing that can actually use the sun's energy: chlorophyll. And one little plant cell is more complex than a space shuttle. It's interesting, though, what happened. Back in the 1950s, the average textbook in America had very little evolution. 2,000 or 3,000 words was all. 1957, the Russians beat us in the space race by launching Sputnik, and Americans panicked. How many of you are old enough to remember the panic in America when the Russians were winning the space race? They had articles in Life magazine, how you can survive fallout. They said the Soviets are ahead of us in science because the Soviets teach evolution. We don't teach it in our schools. They had articles on how to build your own bomb shelter. People were building them in their backyard, to survive nuclear fallout. Wait a minute. The Soviets are ahead in science because they teach evolution. What does evolution have to do with putting up a satellite? Well, then in 1959, it was the 100-year anniversary of Darwin's book coming out. And in 1959, Eisenhower asked Congress for $1 billion to push more evolution into the school system. And he got it. American textbooks were rewritten in the late 50s and early 60s to include more evolution. They called it the Cold War Reconstruction of American Science Education. Our whole science curriculum and other curriculums were rewritten to make sure evolution was taught. And by 1963, the average textbook had 33,000 words about evolution. By 1963, prayer was taken out of our school system. Anybody remember that? Madalyn Murray O'Hair? By 1963, we started to see a great rise in premarital sex for every single age bracket. We saw a great rise in sexually transmitted diseases for 10 to 14-year-olds. We saw a great rise in unwed birth rates, a 550% increase in pregnancies. The difference is being aborted. Now, 1/3 of all the kids born at the hospital are born to a couple that are not married. The number of unmarried couples living together has increased radically since 1963. Divorce rates have gone crazy in this country. Child abuse is up 2,300%. Illegal drug use up 6,000%. Violent crimes nearly 1,000% increase. SAT scores have plummeted since 1963. Twice in the last 40 years, they have dumbed down the test. They made the test dumber, so the scores would go back up. Teen suicide rates gone crazy. Let's see what the scientific evidence says. In 1999, the world's population crossed over the 6 billion mark. In 1985, there were 5 billion people on planet Earth. In 1800, there was 1 billion people here. Everybody agrees there were about 1 billion people around 1800. And everybody agrees the population is growing rapidly. Back when Jesus was here, the world's population was only about 250 million. It looks like the whole population growth curve started about 4,400 years ago. Now, if you believe in evolution, you got a problem. You think man's been here for 3 million years. In 3 million years, the population would have grown. Right now, there'd be about 150,000 people per square inch. The population today tells us man's only been here about 4,400 years. They said it looks like there's been a genetic bottleneck. The whole population was reduced to a few thousand just a couple thousand years ago. They're getting closer. Actually, it was all reduced to 8 about 4,400 years ago. Keep studying. Galaxies are spinning, but the stars in the middle go faster than the stars at the outside. So why do we still have spiral arms on the galaxies? They should not be there, okay? Galaxies are evidence that the Earth, the universe at least, is not billions of years old. Stars are blowing up all the time. It's called a supernova or a nova. But a star blows up about every 30 years, and yet there's less than 300 supernova fragments that have been found, remnants. That's only a few thousand years worth of stars. Why aren't there billions of supernova remnants? Some people say, well, new stars are forming in Crab Nebula or Eagle Horsehead Nebula. No, that's a bunch of baloney. We covered that on video 7. Nobody's ever seen a star form. The planet Jupiter is cooling off rapidly. Saturn, the stars are changing from red giants to white dwarfs. The textbook says it takes billions of years. We know that's not true. All the ancient astronomers said Sirius was a red star. Today it's a white dwarf. It happens in a few thousand years. Don't let them tell you it takes billions of years. Jupiter's cooling off rapidly, constantly losing heat. It cannot be billions of years old. It would have been cold by now. Jupiter's moon Ganymede has a strong magnetic field, indicating a liquid core, meaning it is not billions of years old. Saturn's rings are expanding away from the planet. They cannot be billions of years old. There's more about that in the book In the Beginning by Walt Brown. Excellent book, by the way. The moon goes around the earth. How many knew that already? The moon goes around the earth. Did you know as the moon goes around the earth, it's gradually getting farther away? We're slowly losing the moon. It's leaving us a couple inches a year. No big deal, nothing to worry about, plus nothing you can do about it anyway. But the moon is getting farther from the earth every day. Now, kids, this is going to be complicated, so listen carefully. The moon is getting farther from the earth every day. So that means that it used to be closer. How many can figure this out with no help at all? Okay. Well, if you bring the moon in closer, you start to create a problem because the moon causes the tides. Now, you folks in Knoxville probably don't worry about the tides, but in Pensacola, you worry about the tides. See, if the moon was closer, the tides would be higher. There's a law called the inverse square law. If you brought the moon in to 1/3 the distance, you take the 1/3, flip it over, and square it, it's 9 times the gravitational pull. If you run all the math on this, you'll find out the moon and Earth would have been almost together 1.4 billion years ago. Walt Brown says 1.2 billion years ago is the max lifespan for Earth and moon. Comets are flying around through space, but comets are constantly losing material. I mean, stuff blows off the tail of a comet. You can't just keep losing, okay? Pretty soon it's gone. That's something you just can't keep doing forever. Most astronomers say comets can't last more than about 10,000 years. Okay, well then I have a question. Why do we still have comets out there? They should all be gone by now. Well, this one scoffer on his website said, Hovind, don't you know that a Dutch astronomer back in 1950, his name was Jan Oort, he proposed, it means he hoped, he wished, he prayed, that there was a great shell of comets out there, and new ones keep coming in to replace the old ones that are burning out. So he said, the reason we still have comets is because new ones are replacing the ones that are burning up. They called it the Oort cloud of comets. He said this Oort cloud is 50,000 astronomical units away. Well, if you don't know what an astronomical unit is, it's the distance from the sun to the earth. That's 1 astronomical unit. It's pretty hard to see Pluto without a really good telescope. And Pluto's only 39 astronomical units away. You're never going to see a comet at 50,000 astronomical units, that's for sure, okay? Nobody's ever seen this Oort cloud. Oort never saw the Oort cloud. The whole thing's based on a mathematical mistake. There is no Oort cloud. Even Carl Sagan said, many scientific papers are written each year about the Oort cloud, its properties, its origin, its evolution, yet there's not a shred of direct observational evidence for its existence. There is no Oort cloud. The Earth's magnet has lost 10% of its strength in the last 150 years. That means, of course, it used to be stronger since it's getting weaker, and it cannot be more than 25,000 years old. Just the Earth's magnetic field decline limits it to less than 25,000 years, and that also means carbon dating can't work. Give you a few examples here. The lower leg of a mammoth dated 15,000 years old, but the skin was 21,000. One part of a mammoth is 29,000 years old. Another part's 44,000. You talk about a slow birth. The Earth is spinning about 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, but the Earth is slowing down. The Earth actually slows down about 1,000th of a second every day. The Earth slows down. Astronomy magazine ran an article in 1992. They said Earth's rotation is slowing down. June will be 1 second longer than normal. We will have a leap second. Leap second? Yep. They have to have a leap second about every year to year and a half because the Earth is slowing down. Now, kids, this is going to be complicated, so listen carefully. The Earth is spinning, but it is slowing down. So that means that it used to be going faster. How many can figure this out with no help at all? 4, 5, 6, 9. Okay, good. Well, if the Earth is only 6,000 years old, this is not a problem. I mean, it was going a little faster. Adam wouldn't notice. He didn't have a watch anyway, as far as we know. But some of these guys would like me to believe the Earth is billions of years old. Man, if you go back billions of years, you're going to have a problem. The Earth would be spinning pretty quick. Get up, go to bed, get up, go to bed, get up, go to bed. You'd never get nothing done. Centrifugal force would have been enormous. Man, the winds would have been 5,000 miles an hour from the Coriolis effect. And you want me to believe the dinosaurs lived millions of years ago? I know what happened to them. They got blown off. No, they did not live millions of years ago. The Sahara Desert has what's called a prevailing wind pattern. The wind almost always blows the same way. This creates a serious problem. The hot air comes off the desert, kills the trees next door, and that area becomes desert. The process is called desertification. You can read about it in an earth science book. Sahara Desert has been studied very carefully. They did a long study on this and said, you know what, folks, the Sahara Desert is probably about 4,000 years old. That's when it started growing. Egypt used to be fertile land all over the place. Okay, well then I have a question. If the Earth is millions of years old, why don't we have a bigger desert someplace? Why would the biggest desert on the planet be less than 4,000 years old? Well, I have a theory about that. Now here's my theory. I believe about 6,000 years ago, God created everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. Now, it's pretty hard to have a desert under a flood. You got to admit that would be tough, okay? So the desert couldn't start growing until the flood water went down. So I predict, based on the Bible, the biggest desert in the world will be less than 4,400 years old. It is. Wow, maybe the Bible's right. You know, when they drill into the ground, sometimes they hit oil. The oil's under incredible pressure in some places, up to 20,000 pounds per square inch. It'll come squirting up out of the ground like a big zit. 20,000 psi. Well, the guys who study the rocks on top of the oil say, you know, it just can't handle that pressure for more than about 10,000 years. I know the weight of rock supplies pressure, but the pressure in the well is greater than the weight of overburden. They say it should have cracked the rock and leaked off in less than 10,000 years. Okay. Well, then now I've got two questions. Where did the oil come from? And why is it still under pressure? Well, most scientists agree that oil comes from organisms that are squished. They're changed by heat and pressure into oil. They learned in 1971 how to make oil in 20 minutes in the laboratory. In Australia, they've got a treatment plant that takes sewage sludge and turns it into oil in 30 minutes. There's a factory in Turkey that just opened up, a factory in Texas that takes turkey guts and pressurizes them and heats them and turns them into oil. They said in the article, we duplicated what Mother Nature does, but what Mother Nature took millions of years to do, we do in about 30 minutes. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. Okay? In that flood, lots of critters and people drowned. They got buried by the gravel and the rocks and the mud and the sand, and it got pretty heavy after a while, and it squished them into oil. So the oil's down there today from the people and animals that drowned in that flood. They said, Hovind, we go to Greenland and we drill holes through the ice. You know, government job. And we take this big pipe, we drill it down in, and we bring this ice core out of the middle of the pipe, and we save it in this big freezer here in Lakewood, Colorado. We have 10 ice cores stored in this freezer. They said, they took me over and showed me one of the ice cores. They said, you see these rings on here? It looks like tree rings, dark, light, dark, light. I said, oh yeah, it's real clear. They said, well, what happens in the summer, the snow melts a little bit, and then it refreezes and makes clear ice. Shows up dark on the picture. In the winter, the snow just packs. It doesn't get a chance to melt. And so it shows up as a white layer. So these layers represent summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter. They said, now the deepest hole we've ever drilled is 10,000 feet deep. And we counted these ice rings, and there were 135,000 of them. And now you're going around telling everybody the earth is 6,000 years old. We can prove it's at least 135,000. I said, fellas, aren't you assuming those are annual rings? See, they didn't know about the Lost Squadron, apparently. But in World War II, some airplanes ran out of gas and landed in Greenland. Has anybody ever heard of the Lost Squadron? Okay, it's been on TV a bunch of times. Well, the airplanes got left there in 1942. They went on and fought the war. Everybody forgot about them until a rich millionaire from Kentucky got a brilliant idea. Go find those airplanes and bring them home. He went there looking for the airplanes. They had to use ground-penetrating radar to penetrate the ice, and they located the planes. They melted a hole to get down to a P-38. It was 263 feet below the surface. They melted this hole down to get to the plane, took the plane apart, and brought the pieces back up through the hole and put it back together in Middleborough, Kentucky, not too far from here. How far is Middleborough from Knoxville? 2 hours, maybe? Okay. The planes, that's where its home base is, Middleborough. Well, the planes were in the ice for 48 years. They were 263 feet down. That's 5.5 feet a year. Now, the deepest hole they've ever drilled is 10,000 feet. You divide that by 5.5, you get 1,800 years. I know deeper layers get squished, called glacial firn, so really 4,000 years is plenty of time to put all the ice at the North and South Pole. So why isn't there more ice at the North and South Pole? I visited the museum and saw the guy who dug out the airplane. His name is Bob Cardin. I said, Bob, when you went down to get to that airplane, did you go through ice rings? He said, oh yeah, many hundreds of them. I said, now wait a minute. How can there be hundreds of ice rings in 48 years? Shouldn't there be somewhere around 48? He said, who told you those are annual layers? He said, that doesn't represent summer, winter, summer, winter. It represents warm, cold, warm, cold, warm, cold. You can get 5 of those in 1 week in Knoxville, can't you? Yeah. But here's a guy still calling them annual layers. Now, either he's ignorant or he's lying. A guy that works with the Eskimos said, Brother Hovind, I got 15 layers of snow on my car in 8 hours. Not 15 inches, 15 distinct layers of snow. You kids are going to be taught that each of the layers of the earth is a different age. They've got Cenozoic, Mesozoic, Paleozoic, Archaeozoic. Did you know the whole geologic column is baloney? It doesn't exist. We covered that on video 4. All over the world, petrified trees are found standing up, connecting these rock layers. Petrified tree connecting a bunch of layers can't be millions of years difference in the age of those layers. One in Cookeville, Tennessee, not far from here. The bottom is coalified, the center is petrified, the top is coalified again. Runs through 2 coal seams. Cover more on that on video 6 about coal formation. Mount St. Helens blew trees into Spirit Lake. They're going to petrify very quickly, standing up. That's the way they sank to the bottom. They got waterlogged. Wood petrifies quickly. Here's petrified firewood. Here's a petrified fish giving birth. It does not take millions of years to give birth. Petrified cowboy boot with the cowboy's legs still in it. The article's on the table down here called The Limestone Cowboy. The Mississippi River is depositing sediments at the rate of 80,000 tons every hour. 80,000 tons of mud comes down and dumps off around New Orleans, and that delta is growing larger and larger. They studied the delta pretty carefully and say it probably took about 30,000 years to put all that mud out there in the delta. Okay, well then I have a question. If the earth is millions of years old, why isn't the whole Gulf of Mexico full of mud by now? They'll say, Hovind, it's 30,000 years. That proves the Bible's wrong. The Bible says 6,000. I know, but see, I've got a theory about that. Here's my theory. I believe 6,000 years ago, God made everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. As the flood water was running off, whoosh, about half of that mud washed out there in 20 minutes. So it looks like it took 30,000 years to get the mud out there. It took about 20 minutes. And then 4,400 years since then, okay? A friend of mine from Louisiana is a pastor of a church. He said, Brother Hovind, I used to work in the oil field, drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, drilling for oil. He said, we drilled down through 14,000 feet of mud and hit trees 60 feet tall, standing up. 60-foot vertical trees under 14,000 feet of mud. More about that on video 6. Here's a picture of the oldest tree on the planet. It's called the bristlecone pine. We've got a piece of bristlecone in our museum in Pensacola. It's only 30 inches in diameter, and it's 700 years old. You can count the rings with a magnifying glass. It grows real slow. Now, tree ring dating is not an exact science. Trees can produce 2 rings a year or 3 rings a year. Okay? And be very careful about tree ring dating with overlapping sequencing. We cover more on that during Q&A time if you'd like. But the oldest tree in the world, this textbook says, is 4,300 years old. Earth's oldest organism. That's a pretty old tree. But I've got a question. If the Earth is millions of years old, why don't we have an older tree someplace? Why would the oldest tree be 4,300 years old? I have a theory about that. Now, here's my theory. I believe about 6,000 years ago, God made everything, and 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. And so I predict the oldest tree ought to be somewhere around 4,300 years old. It is. Wow. Maybe that Bible's right, you know? Maybe you ought to read that thing and believe it. Here's a picture of a coral reef. You know, the largest reef in the world's in Australia. I had a call from a church in Brisbane one time. They said, do you want to come preach over here in Australia? I said, I need to pray about this. He said, yes. I took my whole family over to Australia. My daughter and I got to go scuba diving at the Great Barrier Reef. It was incredible. Some of the reef was destroyed during World War II by ships and anchors and bombs and stuff like that. So the environmentalist wackos went out there to see how fast it grows back. They watched the reef grow for 20 years. It was a government project. After watching it grow for 20 years, they said the reef is less than 4,200 years old. Okay, well then I have a question. If the Earth is millions of years old, why don't we have a bigger reef someplace? Why on earth would the biggest reef be only 4,200 years old? I have a theory about that. I bet you know what it is, don't you? Can you figure it out by now? Okay. Here's a picture of Niagara Falls. The textbook says, boys and girls, the rocky ledge above Niagara Falls has been eroding for nearly 9,900 years. Now, how do they know that? Well, the rocks are breaking off the edge. I mean, all waterfalls do that. They break rocks off, and the waterfall eats its way backwards, okay? Flows one direction, erodes the other direction. Niagara Falls is moving back 4.7 feet a year. Charles Lyell went there in 1841 and said, well, Niagara Falls is here. Obviously, it started up here at the cliff by Lewiston, New York. It's moving back down the gully. He said it's 10,000 years old worth of erosion. The people that lived there said, Charlie, it erodes a whole lot faster than you think. One good rainstorm and there's a whole lot of erosion takes place. He figured 3 feet a year, purposely to make the Bible look wrong. He hated the Bible. We'll get into more of him on video number 4. Today, Niagara Falls is way back there, split over that island. There's actually 2 Niagara Falls, the Canadian side and the American side. It's eroded back quite a ways just since Charles Lyell's time. The textbook says this gorge that the river runs in, is 7.5 miles long. A simple calculation shows it's been 9,900 years. Oh, it's not that simple. See, Niagara Falls is right here. It started off further north up by Lewiston. If the Earth is millions of years old, why hasn't it eroded back to Lake Erie by now? Why is Niagara Falls right there? I have a theory about that, okay? Now here's my theory. You see, about 6,000 years ago, God made everything, and 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. As the flood water was running off, whoosh, about half of that creek washed out in 20 minutes. So it looks like it took 9,900 years. They forgot the flood. They also forgot to get the right number. It should have been 8,400 had they used 4.7, but, you know, what do you expect? Okay. When it rains, 30% of the water runs into the ocean, bringing with it mineral salts. The oceans are getting saltier every day. Today, they're 3.6% salt. They could have done that in less than 5,000 years. Question, why aren't the oceans saltier? Well, you see, 6,000 years ago, God made everything. 4,400 years ago, there's a flood. Now, since the flood's been over, the oceans have gradually gotten saltier. One atheist I debated said, Hovind, would you please tell me how the freshwater fish survived the flood? I said, sir, aren't you assuming the flood was salt water? He said, the ocean is salt water. I said, well, it is today, yeah. During the flood, it's probably mostly fresh water, and it's gradually gotten saltier, and today some animals have had to adapt to salt water. And now we have freshwater crocodiles and saltwater crocodiles, and they probably had a common ancestor, a crocodile. He said, that's evolution. I said, no, it's not. Going from a freshwater croc to a saltwater croc is a minor change compared to your evolution story. You believe they changed from a rock to a croc. Now, that's a major change, okay? A friend of mine in Alabama raises fish. He said he took a freshwater fish, black mollies, slowly added salt to their aquarium. In 2 weeks, they became saltwater fish. When he put them back in freshwater, they died in 30 minutes. They can adapt to salt water, not a problem. How many have ever gone into a cave and the guide said, don't touch the formations. They take millions of years to form. They all got the same speech, right? You go over here to, what's the one in Kentucky? Mammoth Cave? Or go to Carlsbad Caverns and they say it took 250 million years. They did a study on these stalactites and one guy said, you know, the fastest they can grow is 2.5 inches per 1,000 years. That's the maximum growth rate. I don't think so. Here are some 50-inch stalactites growing under the Lincoln Memorial. They did that in 40 years. There's a bat covered up with flowstone before it could even rot. There's 2-inch stalactites growing off a refrigeration shed in Pensacola, Florida. There's a guy in a building in Indiana built just 40 years ago, has huge cave formations in the basement of the building from water leaking through the limestone. There's a mine was shut down in Australia for 55 years. When they opened it back up to check it out, there were huge cave formations in 55 years. There's a pipe that was dripping water for 7 years, made a 13-inch stalactite. I thought it was 2.5 inches per 1,000 years. It's more like 2 inches per year. They broke off the stalagmite that was under it and gave it to me. It's in my museum. There's a parking garage built in 1997 in Texas. It was making stalagmites on the students' cars parking under it. They had to put up a drip pan to catch the water. A guy in Wyoming had a hot mineral spring on his property in Thermopolis, Wyoming. So he stuck a pipe in the ground. The water came out the top of the pipe and bubbled out the side of the top of the pipe, you know. But it had a little fountain. They called it the teepee fountain. Well, the guy died. They left the pipe sticking in the yard. As the pipe was there, it left behind mineral deposits as the water evaporated. How many have seen these mineral deposits? You get them on your sink up here? Okay. The guy died, and about 95 years after he died, after the pipe was stuck in the ground, I went to see it. Here it is, back in 1998. That would take some lime away to scrub that thing clean, don't you think? Yeah, a little bit. The guy down the street started his later. It's not quite as big, you know. But you know, at the current rate of erosion, the continents will erode flat in 14 million years. Why do they tell us we've got fossils that are 300 times older than that, still above sea level? They should have washed out to sea 300 times. All you got to do is fly out west and look at the erosion patterns and say, man, this place was destroyed by a flood. I mean, the whole world was destroyed by a flood. Just fly around like I do and look out the window once in a while. The oldest languages in the world are kind of interesting. Origin of major writing systems from National Geographic. What do they say? Well, they say the oldest writing systems in the world started about 3000 BC. 5,000 years ago. Oldest writing systems. And the oldest languages are modern, sophisticated, and complete. The Chinese said the year 2000 was the year 4700. They think they started their calendar with the flood. They called Noah Fuhai. The oldest recorded capital punishment, 3,800 years ago. The Hebrew calendar said the year 2000 was 5760. We know the Hebrew calendar is messed up because a rabbi purposely took some years out to make it not match the prophecy to fit Jesus. The Saxons had a genealogy going back to Adam. The Danes and Norwegians had a king list going back to Noah. Don't trust the Egyptian king list. That is greatly exaggerated. See the work by Corville on that and Evolution Cruncher. Why are the oldest reliable historical records less than 6,000 years old? Well, I have a theory about that. I bet you know what it is, don't you? Yeah. That Bible is absolutely right, folks. Absolutely correct, scientifically. The evidence for a young Earth is overwhelming.